Spare parts, square body. What we're dealing with today, starters. If you guys like mud bogging or racing, or if you're just gonna play in the mud, I definitely recommend a high torque starter. If you have an old style Chevy starter, an old familiar one, this one, it's gonna fill up with mud rather quick, and it's gonna leave you obviously not starting, and you're gonna have to pull your truck onto the trailer or fix it on the trail or at the mud bog or at the race. It sucks. These starters, what I've experienced, they only last about a race for me, like a 1 day of racing. It fills up with mud and then it's over, and then I'm winching this thing or getting guys to pull me to my trailer or on the trailer. It was always a mess. Once I switched over to this high torque starter setup, it was really good. I never had an issue with it. So if you're doing anything with mud wise with any truck, I recommend buying one of these. It saves you a lot of hassle. They can take a lot more. I also seal up this truck really good underneath. That's going to be in other videos once I get it running. And I use the same amount of sealing with this starter as I do with this, and the longevity is just not there with this old style starter. It works great, you know, for older engines, whatever, you can use it, but when it comes to mud and dirt, you want one of these high torque starters. So we're gonna slap this on and get it up in there. The truck, we're gonna throw in the starter. You gotta make sure you got the correct bolts. That low pro starter has its own bolts that don't stick out as far as the stock ones. These things usually work pretty good, but once I go to start it, I'll find out if I have to shim it or not. Goobered up. That. I know I said a bit anti-seize, but this stuff, it spreads everywhere. Okay, now to tighten it. We'll just start the bolts by hand first. Yeah, I'll just double check it with my ratchet, but like I said, pretty straightforward. Starter's nice and solid. Got to make sure with these high torque starters if they send bolts with it or not. This one did have special bolts. It's not a crazy, like, it's a Dixie, I think. It's a off-brand. It's made in Canada. That's a miracle. It was probably the last starter that was ever made in Canada. Okay, that's done. Do the drive shaft, of course. There's nothing special. This thing was kind of hodgepodge together from a couple different drive shafts and made to work with a short box. This drivetrain was out of a, like the transmission transfer case were out of a 1970 some 3/4 ton. So we did kind of chop down the drive shaft. It was nothing crazy, greatly done because it's just a mud racer. I don't really care. But this is what I got going on and some tricks that I do with this rear drive shaft. On these splines, we put a little bit of lubrication. I just use regular grease, make sure that's all cleaned up, shot up, put it in there. That's stating the obvious. Now underneath this thing, I also clean it up really well. Oop. I clean it up, underneath the truck, I clean it up really well, and I pack this really full of grease. And then what I'm gonna do later on, once I get the drive shaft in and bolted up, I run a bead of silicone around this to act as kind of a wiper, a shield, a seal, because there should have been a seal here and there isn't. Whatever, so we make one out of RTV and then just make sure it's packed full of grease, and that kind of stops it from rusting together and seizing. I usually service this, like when I would race every weekend, I'd service this once a year, and it worked really well doing this setup. This shaft, it doesn't have a mast or spline or nothing. So on this truck, or how it was built and how the drive lines were built, you gotta just make sure everything's kind of lined up as close as you can. I mean, with 38s on it in the mud, I'm not really expecting to be great for vibration, but just so it doesn't destroy itself. And then once I get it in there, I just kind of make sure I'm fairly straight with it. It's not that hard of a process to do with this one. And this drive shaft was kind of made from a few different trucks. I bought this drivetrain and it was modified for another truck, and I kind of made it all work with drive shafts and stuff, kind of keeping it cheap on budget. I've brake cleaned this collar off, and now I'll run a bead of silicone in there, and it acts as a seal. It's not 100%, and with the extra grease and everything, I haven't had any problems with it. Like I said, every year I used to take that apart at the beginning of the season and service all that, clean that out, and do the same thing over again, and I never run into any issues with it, and it works. So I'll show the after. The result, it's not pretty, but it works. And with that grease being there, the silicone usually doesn't stick and it lets it move a little bit more freer when the dry shaft plunges. If it rips off, no big deal. It's silicone and greased up, so that should be good. We're gonna let it dry now. And of course, I got my safety chain in case that would ever break off. This would catch it. This is another Dixie product. I have no idea why past John was putting Dixie on everything. Future John's questioning his decision, but it's still charging and that's still starting. So shout out to Dixie for keeping my mud truck running. So we're gonna put that on, nothing special, pretty straightforward cover bolts. I just use anti-seize where I can. That way it doesn't seize if I need to take it off. Has that bracket all bolted in right here. It's all good to go. Like I said, it's pretty straightforward. It's just the one bolt down here. And that way after you slather everything with anti-seize, you also get to be coated in it. I ran the battery cable now. I'll show you what I did from the starter all the way back into the box. And then I'll take you in the box and show you what I all wired up. I kind of ran all the wires off camera. It's not that exciting, believe me. Okay, there's the wire hooked to the starter. And I just ran it all down the frame right there. And it goes up through the box, the negative, and I ground the negative on the frame. I'm using the frame as part of my negative cable, of course. Sometimes frowned upon. This build, it is not. And it goes through the floor. I'm gonna take you in the box and show you what's going on in there. In the box here, we got where our battery's gonna go. I had that in there last time. My positive cable is this one. It runs from here up to the starter, as you've seen, and you're probably thinking, what the hell is that? It's the rear license plate hold for the Regal. This is where I got most of my stuff, well, the engine and some of the electrical. It's a master switch on and off, controlled through the negative, grounded to the frame, of course, goes to the battery and down to the frame. I don't know if I'm gonna keep that or not, haven't decided. Now on the fuel tank here, I ran my little fuel pump. This is also from the Regal, and ran through the floor, bed of the floor, and up front to the fuel line that I already had for the LS. I had it all, I left the fuel line in from the LS swap, so I just use that. And the boat tank, nothing too crazy here. And I ran a 12 volt feed up into the pump from the cab. It's on a switch on that dash there. So I do have a switch to the fuel pump. And yeah, that's the box. Got the starter in there. I'm gonna throw up the uprights, make sure all the electrical is gonna clear. These are just a center dump, upright, drag header. I don't know what, Schoenfield or Schoenfield. I butcher the name every time I say it. I've ran these style headers on my previous 400. And I had one set of just regular headers underneath the truck, but after 1 year I went to these, and the LS had uprights too from the same company. They work great. There are some pluses, there are some downsides. Obviously the plus is your exhaust isn't exiting underneath your truck, and if you swamp it bad enough, I've seen, well, it shouldn't suck it in. I've seen it just a stock exhaust system fill up with mud and water, cook it engine. This probably won't. You'd have to be, up past the windshield, I'm thinking. But on the downside, having them up center dump like this, you got to remove your brake booster, and that's what I did over here. I'll show you what's going on there. And I also used a master cylinder from a C20 out at my farm in 1975. It was a cast one. I had the original aluminum one here, and I broke it, and the cast one worked a lot better than the aluminum stock one off this 85. So I'm gonna throw these headers on. I don't use anything special, just Velcro, and they're individually packaged. They're easier to slip on. You can kind of bolt the header up a little bit easier instead of having those big long pieces. I don't put no silicone on, nothing. What I do before I do any header job on any vehicle is I take a file and I make sure these are all nice. You probably take it to a machine shop too if you want to be really crazy, finicky. But I just take a file and I clean this edge because these are all uneven. Try to get those as even as I can across the whole board, and that's really, I say, a great success on my header installs. I usually don't have them leak or problems with them that way. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. You put the bolts in there, 11 mils, you will fight and curse, or 11 mil head or 7/16. You will fight and curse, but that's just headers. I sometimes try to start with the ends. Get them in there. Then you can put the other bolts in. That one's got loads of room. Yeah. This is As easy as that. Now you can just snuggle up evenly. There's the master cylinder. I got the booster all removed from here, and I did have an aluminum one on here, and then I want to say I had to shave these down to make it all clear and fit, and I should have just used maybe longer bolts. I can't remember what I had to do, but the aluminum one didn't work, and I went to this cast one out of that 75C20. I wrapped it. It was really close with the LS swap. I think you could put like a piece of paper in there. I'm gonna throw up this one and then we'll see how much it clears, because I didn't really modify this at all from when I did the original uprights and then the LS, and now this, it should clear like a dream. But that's what some of the downsides you're dealing with, is you got to remove that booster. There's that header to that. It's actually got lots of room, this one. I think I ground this down here because the LS was so wide it used to touch. But if you have the booster on, it pushes it all out here. I do torque them up, and then I always recheck them after they run. They do sometimes back off a little bit, but not too bad. But basically, operates aren't that bad. I said I was going to be cursing installing those little bolts down there. They were pretty easy, actually. I just used an 11 mil snap-on 1/4 inch. I was able to get them all very easy. So that's what it looks like with uprights. And of course, I guess maybe one downside that I didn't mention is chopping holes in the hood. It does suck. And then some guys make I know when I used to race, they made a more elongated hole so that hood would sit there on the hinges and lift up, and then you could just lift it up like a normal hood. So this one I have to pick off. I don't use any of the hinges, and I don't know, sometimes it can be a pain, but usually I can actually lift it off by myself, or I could back in the day. Got a few things done on it again. I got the starter on there and the alternator, which are easier jobs. Got that main battery cable around from the starter all the way back to the battery. Got it put up there. I also ran the kill switch there on that old license plate holder from the Regal. Got that. The fuel pump's all wired in the back. The ground wire's there, and I ran the main power wire from up front here all the way to the back. I have that on a switch to kill the pump. Got my uprights on, of course. That went all good. I got to make sure to seal them up when it's sitting outside. Water does go in there, so sometimes pop bottles, cans, whatever you want, seal those things up good if you got them. What else did I get done? Oh, I got that rear drive shaft on there. It's all fitting good. I'm happy with that. The front drive shaft from this is now in my big red square, so I got to come up with a plan. I got a drive shaft here. It's about 1 3/4 inches too short, so I'm hoping a machinist in town will help me out. He'd cut it and just extend it. I got to talk to him on that, or else maybe I'll try to do it again. I opened up the transmission, put a new filter in there, just cleaned it out, because obviously when I pulled the dipstick out, when I took this drivetrain out, there was a bunch of dirt, and I was worried about dirt in the tranny. There was some crap in there. There's also probably some clutch material in there, I'm not gonna lie, but yeah, it'll be fine. It's a Turbo 400, it's fine. Again, thanks for watching. Stick with me on it. I'm slowly doing it in my spare time. Hopefully next time I can prime it, fire it possibly, and at least you'll be able to hear it running. Again, thanks for watching.